You know the dream is like a river, ever changing where it flows. And the dream is just a vessel that must follow where it... Oh, you snuck up on me again. Oh, I'm glad you could come over. You know, this week's lesson is about water, and we're gonna learn about, you know, when you turn the hose on, where does that water come from? So, in my house, we can come on over and take a look. We don't want to drink the water from the lake. A lot of you know the old expression, does a bear poop in the woods? Well, I could ask the same question, does a fish poop in the lake? And the answer, of course, is yes. So you don't want to drink poopy water from either the lake or the forest. So how do we keep ourselves from drinking poopy water? Well, that starts over here. We have a well, because we live in a more rural part of Oakland County. So come on over a little bit closer. So what you can see here is the well casing. And this well casing has a cap. Take it off. And somewhere down here, attached to these wires, is a powerful pump. And when we turn the power on to that pump, water flows up from deep underneath the ground into our basement, where it goes to the pressure tank. But the point of a well casing is to protect us, because what we want to do is we want to drink the water that is deep underneath the ground, that doesn't have bear poop in it or fish poop in it. So to make sure that we get safe drinking water, we put this casing here, and that casing only allows us to pull water from a certain depth. And I can show you more about that inside. Good. Hey everybody. Well, this is where the water comes from the well, and you'll notice it's actually a little bit deeper than ground level, because if it came in at the surface, the water would freeze during the winter. So the water comes in, and actually right now, this pressure tank is operating. This right here is a pressure switch, and you can see that the pressure is rising, and it actually will rise into about 60 psi. The idea is this pressure tank is going to hold water so that that pump doesn't have to turn on every time you need water. That pump is powerful, that's at the bottom of the well, and it's very expensive. And every time that pump turns on, it's going to take a little bit of life away. And so what this does, this pressure tank, is it allows a steady flow of pressure of water so that when you turn on the faucet, it's going to draw down from this tank until it reaches a certain pressure. At this point is 40. So some of you with wells know that if you're in the shower, you lose pressure for a little while while the pump refreshes the amount of water that's in the pressure tank. And these wires right here go all the way out to the pump and down into the bottom of the well, and this switch measures the pressure changes. So when we need more water, it sends power to the pump fills up the bladder, and it keeps us with a steady supply of water. This is the pressure tank and the pressure switch. Hey everybody, while I'm down here, I may as well show you, because we live in North Oakland County, the water here naturally has a high amount of arsenic in it. And arsenic has been known to cause health problems. So we have to use a reverse osmosis system. So you'll notice the green says RO membrane. You may recall that osmosis is the movement of water from high to low. And so we force that water where it doesn't want to go to a side of higher pressure through a membrane. When that happens, we leave the arsenic behind and we're able to clean the water. So arsenic in Oakland County is a problem. So a lot of people with wells need to have filters. Hey everybody. Oh, little special story here about these fish. Actually, Hanson got these fish almost 6 years ago, and they're still here hanging out with us. They sit over here next to the kitchen sink here, and notice that pressure tank allows me to turn the water on and off, and there's no lag time for that water to run from deep down in the well ultimately here to the supply. So That's how that pressure tank works. There's a big bladder in there that inflates and then pushes the water out as soon as you open up the faucet. Well, I just wanted you to meet our fish here and see the end product. That's where our drinking water comes from. So now a little bit more about the schematics. So if our drinking water comes from deep beneath that lake, well then what does it look like from a side profile? Well, if we took a look here, this is where we were just at. This would be the wellhead with the cap on it. And then deep down in that shaft, there would be the pipe would end. And then down here, you can see that's where the pump would be. Because this is the water that we want. We don't want the surface water that's up here at the lake. We want the water that's percolated slowly down deep into this limestone aquifer. Now there's a blessing and a curse with limestone. The blessing is that the water is highly filtered. The curse is that one common thing within the limestone is sulfur and other minerals. And those minerals, called hardness, oftentimes create problems for your plumbing supply. But you notice that this casing right here, it goes all the way down through what's called glacial till. So the house up here is built on this hill that goes ultimately down to the lake. You'll notice that the surface of the lake represents something called the water table, and that rises up onto the hill somewhere up underneath the house. So in theory, we could drop a well maybe 30 feet down into the ground and be able to draw up that drinking water. But again, that would be bear poopy water and fishy poopy water. So that straw or that casing goes all the way down some 300 feet. And then there's an end to it, but the drill shaft continues down, and that drill shaft is down into the limestone. And then it's porous, so water is able to drain from that limestone into this void where the pump collects it and pushes it up into the house. Now, a couple things we do to keep our well water safe. When they initially drill this hole into the ground, they put cement between the pipe and the ground. And that makes sure that if there's any kind of contamination up here at the surface of the ground, that contamination cannot get down into the drinking water. So that's a little bit about the terminology. The water table can rise and fall based on how much precipitation we have. And sometimes in the spring, that water table rises and can create problems in people's basements. Whereas later in the year, that water table goes down and people's basements and septic fields will operate more correctly. So that's the water that gets down into the ground. Of course, there's also surface runoff. And also, we talked a little bit about soil last week. The organic material within the top layer of the soil can hold on to moisture, and that's important for the plants. So typically, on a hot summer day, the more nutrient-rich your soil and the more organic material and humus and peat that's in the soil, it can hold on to moisture so that those plants don't desiccate throughout the day. So one other thing here is notice that as we go from the lake, it hits the hill and the water table actually rises. This is kind of the same way that water wicks up into paper towel. It's called capillary action. So water, by its very nature, is polar and will want to wick up against gravity to the top of the hill. It doesn't usually get all the way to the top of the hill, but oftentimes the water table will follow somewhat the topography of the land. You'll also notice down here that if I turn this pump on, I'm going to draw water down into what's called the cone of depression. And this becomes a problem in some really powerful irrigation systems. When that well turns on, it's drawing so much water that it actually creates what's called the cone of depression in the water table. And if you're a neighbor and you have a well over here, it's possible that when the farmer turns on his pump, they actually draw down so much water that it dries out the well of the surrounding neighbors. And that's why the state of Michigan regulates how much water people are able to pull out, because it's a state resource. Technically, people can't own water. It's a resource that belongs to all the people of the state of Michigan. And that's some of the things that we think about when we give permits for those wells. Well, hey everybody. The rain is kind of getting in the way of my full lesson plan for the day, but I certainly can show you around in the garage here. Remember we said that that well down at the bottom of, or the pump rather, at the bottom of the well was really powerful? Well, it's so powerful that it takes 220 volts to actually power that pump. And a couple of things, the higher voltage can actually save on economy when you are getting the water out of the ground. But this is our paint closet out in the garage. But in the paint closet, we also have part of our water system, the water softener. And many of you have had to carry in salt, and that salt is full of sodium chloride, calcium chloride, and other ions. Many of you that have had chemistry know that these ions, positively and negatively charged ions, have the ability to stick together, and we know that opposites attract. And our goal is, as the water comes in from the outside, we want to pull the hardness out of the water, the calcium and the chloride and the iron especially. You can even see some of the oxidation here. Well, when the water comes in the house hard, it goes through the water softener. And to soften water means to remove the minerals from that water so that you're able to wash the soap out of your hair and you're able to not have those nasty iron stains in your toilet. So again, hard water comes in, reacts with the salt, those ions bind together, and ultimately that actually has to get flushed out in the flush system. So in the evenings, usually when you're sleeping, all of that nasty brine water gets pumped out, including the hardness. So that's how a water softener works. So in our house, we have filtration systems to remove arsenic and a softener to remove the hardness and the minerals from the water. Hey everybody. Well, so some of you are thinking, Polonkey, I don't get my drinking water from the well. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, we have to get our water from somewhere. And of course, we live in the Great Lakes state, right? We've got Lake Superior and Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, Lake St. Clair, Lake Erie, and somewhere off in the distance, Lake Ontario. So we do have a lot of freshwater resources. In fact, some of the most freshwater resources in the world. But if you don't have well water, where does it come from? So right about now is when I'd start singing this song. Most of you won't remember it. In John Deere green, in ladders 3 foot high, he wrote Billy Bob loves Charlene. And so it's a country song about a weird high school relationship where Billy Bob loved Charlene. So the whole town could see what he wrote. Well, where did he write it? On the water tower. So water towers are where city water comes from. And the purpose of a water tower is to store water up above the ground and above our houses. And instead of relying on well pumps and pressure tanks, all of this weight of water pushing down will allow you to get steady amounts of pressure throughout your house. So you turn on the water here in your sink, and the pressure or the weight of that water pushing down throughout the distribution system is going to provide that pressure of water. But where did the water tower get the water? Well, for us, that's pretty special. So remember we said that one of the problems with well water is hardness. So anytime you drill a well down into the ground and you pull water up from the ground, you're going to pull in minerals. And minerals, they can make the water taste weird or smell weird, and you have to treat the water. Remember the story about the arsenic. So what I did here is a map of Michigan, and here's of course Lake Orion and Lansing. So what this represents is Lake Michigan and Grand Rapids. Here's Lansing in the middle of the state, and Lake Orion. Two things I want you to notice. Notice that Lake Orion is actually pretty high. A little bit higher in terms of sea level than Lansing, and maybe a little bit higher than Grand Rapids. So this is the topography of the state. And on one side you have Lake Michigan, and on the other side you have Lake Huron. So it is nice if you live next to a big lake, like Lake Huron or Lake Michigan, because if you pull the water from a pipe 2 miles out in the lake, the water is much cleaner. It doesn't have all of those or as much of those dissolved minerals. So if you have city water, that's actually where your water comes from. It comes from the middle of Lake Huron, deep in the ground or deep underneath the water, so that we don't pull off the stuff at the top and we don't suck up the muck off the bottom, but we try to pull the clean water out of the lake. And then what we have to do, and one of the things that makes our water so expensive, is we have to pump it all the way uphill to Lake Huron, or I'm sorry, to Lake Orion. And there, when we get to Lake Orion, we can put it up into the water tower. And so there is a water treatment plant where they bleach the water and they make sure there's no bacteria and viruses in the water. But it cost us a little bit more money to get our city water because it's such a great distance from where it's pulled in at the lake and the distribution place here in Lake Orion. A lot of advantages to having a city water system is you can put houses very tight together because there's a lot of water supply. So you can have more houses in a confined amount of space, and that water typically is a little bit cleaner because it's going through a municipal cleaning supply or cleaning process. And so a lot of people appreciate their well water, or rather their city water, because they don't have to deal with the hardness of the well water. So one thing is for sure, if you do drink city water, you can almost always taste the chlorine. And here's why. By law, when they put bleach in your drinking water, the purpose of that bleach is to make sure that there's no bacteria that are able to survive in these pipes on the way to your house. And they call that a chlorine residual. And a chlorine residual is important to make sure that our drinking water supply stays safe. So whether you're getting your water from the ground or you're getting it from Lake Huron, we are very lucky in Michigan to have lots and lots of fresh water supply. Thanks for coming back. Just one last section of our lesson, which is water quality, and many of you know the story of Flint, Michigan. So why did Flint, Michigan's water become so polluted or become contaminated? Well, come on over. So Flint is north of Lake Orion, and Flint is pretty far away from Lake Huron, just like Lake Orion is. And what had happened in Flint was they had some economic hardships within the municipality. They were trying to save money. So Flint, like Lake Orion, was pulling water from Lake Huron, but that water was more expensive. Do you remember that pulling water such a great distance tends to be more expensive, and Flint could not pay their bills? So the city manager and emergency manager said, well, here's our sources of water. We can get the water from the lake, we can pull it from the river like we used to, or we can draw it from the ground. Well, the river, the system was already in place to draw water from the Flint River. But there is a conundrum there. Whenever you pull water from a river, you're going to pull it from the wetlands that water came from. And there's a special chemical that comes from plants. So plants produce a chemical called tannic acid. And it's a brown substance. Sometimes you've been up north to a river like the Tequamanon River, and the Tequamanon Falls are brown. Well, the water is clean, it just has a naturally occurring acid called tannic acid. And here's where it all went awry. The city needed to save money, so it stopped paying for its more expensive lake water. The people who treat the water were told to start drawing the water from the river, but the old folks that ran the water treatment plant knew that they had to treat the water from the acid. But these new people did not. So here's what ended up happening. The tannic acid that they were drawing up from the river water started to corrode the pipe because they didn't neutralize the acid. This corrosion on the inside of the pipe was obvious to people because all of a sudden they start seeing all of this nasty iron gook in their water, and they complained about it. They said something's wrong with our water. Well, the water treatment people said, well, it's just iron and it's going to go away. Well, iron isn't so bad, but what is bad is what is holding these iron pipes together. These iron pipes and the supply line from the water main to people's houses were made of lead. The lead solder holds the pipes together inside the ground, and as the tannic acid from the river eroded the pipes away, it freed the lead into the water supply and contaminated people's water. So they basically, to mitigate this, they had to replace all of the supply lines. And over time, the only way to truly get rid of all of the lead in the distribution system is to replace all of those pipes to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, which clearly the city of Flint did not have. So a tragic accident where just people not knowing what the best way to keep the water supply safe. They needed to save money, but they also needed to supply safe water. So it was quite a conundrum for them. So that's the story of Flint's water. An update today, water is still contaminated. Many people still pick up their drinking water or use filters like we do here for our arsenic water that comes from the ground. But you have to be aware that there is contamination and pollution in many different sources of water.